Have you ever wondered why, no matter how hard you work, no matter how much money you save, everything just gets more expensive? Your rent goes up, your groceries go up, your bills go up, but your salary stays almost the same. Most people believe inflation is just a normal part of life, something natural, something inevitable, something we simply need to accept. But what if that's not true? What if inflation is not a force of nature, but a man-made mechanism, designed, controlled, and triggered? What if rising prices are not the real problem, but only the symptom of something much deeper happening inside the global financial system? Today, you will understand inflation in a way schools, governments, and banks never explain. And once you see how the system truly works, you'll understand why prices rise, who benefits, and why your money loses value year after year, even when you're not spending it. Let's begin.
The basic lie we're told about inflation. Most explanations say inflation happens because prices go up. But that's backwards. Inflation is not when prices rise. Inflation is when the value of money falls. The prices are only reacting. Imagine if suddenly, overnight, the government doubled the amount of money in circulation. You wake up with twice as many dollars, but so does everyone else. Nothing new was produced, no extra goods, no extra services, just more money. So what happens? Everyone has more cash, but the same number of houses, cars, groceries, and resources still exist. The value of each dollar drops. People need more dollars to buy the same things. Prices rise, but that rise is a consequence, not the cause. Inflation is a silent tax. And once you understand this, everything else becomes clearer.
Where money actually comes from. To understand inflation, you need to understand how money is created. Most people imagine a printing press, giant machines printing dollar bills all night. But today, 97% of money is digital, and the majority of it isn't created by governments. It's created by banks. Here's how the process actually works. Simplified, but accurate. You go to a bank and ask for a loan. The bank checks your credit, they approve the loan, they give you the money. But here's the twist. The money didn't exist before you signed the loan. It was created on the spot, out of nothing with a digital entry. This is called fractional reserve banking. And every time a new loan is issued, the money supply increases. And every time the money supply increases, the value of existing money decreases. This constant creation of new money is one of the biggest drivers of inflation, but it's only part of the story.
Why do governments need inflation? If inflation destroys purchasing power, if inflation makes people poorer, if inflation frustrates voters, why don't governments stop it? Why not freeze the money supply and stabilize the economy? The answer is simple and uncomfortable. Governments are addicted to inflation. Here's why. Governments borrow money constantly to build infrastructure, fund programs, run institutions, pay employees, and handle crises. But when inflation rises, something interesting happens. The real value of government debt goes down. If a government owes $1 trillion and inflation is high, the value of every future payment becomes smaller in real terms. It's like taking a loan today and paying it back in monopoly money later. This creates an incentive. Governments benefit from inflation. They don't want hyperinflation. That creates chaos. But moderate inflation? That's the sweet spot they don't publicly talk about. This is why inflation targets exist, not to protect the population, but to protect the system.
The central bank's role in controlling and causing inflation. Central banks, like the Federal Reserve, claim they fight inflation. And yes, sometimes they do. But they also create the conditions for inflation by adjusting two powerful tools. 1. Interest rates. When interest rates are low, borrowing becomes cheap. People borrow more, businesses borrow more, banks create more money through loans. Money supply grows, inflation rises. 2. Quantitative easing.
This is when the central bank buys assets from the market to inject liquidity. In simple terms, they print money digitally and use it to buy bonds and securities. This expands the money supply tremendously. Between 2008 and 2022, trillions of dollars were created through QE. This money didn't enter the economy evenly. It flowed into stocks, real estate, and corporations, inflating prices in those areas first. The result? Higher home prices, higher asset prices, higher living costs, and eventually, higher consumer prices. Central banks don't just fight inflation, they shape it.
Why prices rise at different speeds, asset inflation versus consumer inflation. When people think of inflation, they think of groceries, gas, electricity, rent. But there's a more dangerous type of inflation, asset inflation. Asset inflation hits housing, stocks, land, commodities, companies. This inflation isn't always visible to regular people, but it's often far more extreme. Housing prices don't rise simply because materials cost more. They rise because there is more money chasing the same number of houses. Stocks rise for the same reason. The rich get richer not just because they own assets, but because the system pushes new money directly into those assets first. This phenomenon is known as the Cantillon effect. Who benefits? Those closest to newly created money. Banks, corporations, investors. Who suffers? Those farthest from it. Workers, savers, people with fixed incomes, people without assets. This is why the middle class shrinks while the wealthy grow wealthier.
Supply shock inflation, when prices rise even without printing money. Not all inflation comes from money printing. Sometimes prices rise because supply drops, like oil shortages, shipping disruptions, wars, pandemics, crop failures, factory shutdowns. This type of inflation is called cost-push inflation. Imagine, if suddenly 40% of global wheat can't be exported, bread prices soar, not because of more money, but because of fewer goods. But here's the catch. Governments often respond by pumping more money into the system to help people, which ends up increasing inflation even more. A double hit.
The human psychology behind inflation, why it feeds itself. Inflation isn't just economic, it's psychological. If people think prices will rise, workers demand higher salaries, businesses raise prices preemptively, companies stockpile inventory, investors move money into assets, consumers buy early to avoid future hikes. This creates a self-reinforcing cycle. Expectations become reality. Inflation grows simply because people believe it will. This feedback loop is one of the most powerful forces in economics.
Who actually wins during inflation? Inflation feels bad for everyone, but some groups benefit massively. 1. Governments. Their debt becomes cheaper to pay. 2. Banks. They earn more interest from bigger loans. 3. Corporations. They raise prices faster than their costs rise. 4. Investors. They hold assets that inflate in value. 5. People with real estate. Mortgages become cheaper in real terms while home values rise. Inflation redistributes wealth from people who earn money to people who own money-making assets. It is a transfer of purchasing power. Quiet, slow, invisible, but extremely effective.
Who loses during inflation? The biggest victims are 1. Wage workers. Salaries rarely keep up with rising prices. 2. Savers. Money in the bank loses value every single day. 3. Retirees. Fixed incomes don't adjust fast enough. 4. Renters. Housing costs rise faster than wages. 5. Small businesses. They struggle with rising costs and shrinking margins.
Inflation is essentially a penalty on not owning assets.
The silent erosion, how inflation destroys generational wealth. Most people don't realize how destructive inflation becomes over time. If inflation averages 7% per year, which is not uncommon, your money loses half its value in just 10 years. At 10% inflation, it loses half its value in 7 years. But the system encourages saving money in banks, checking accounts, savings accounts, all of which lose value every year. Meanwhile, assets rise. This is how wealth inequality widens decade after decade. Inflation is not an accident. It is a mechanism.
Why prices keep rising even when inflation slows down. Governments like to say inflation dropped from 8% to 3%. People celebrate, but they misunderstand something crucial. Prices didn't fall. They just rose more slowly. If bread was $2 and inflation hits 10%, now it's $2.20. If the next year inflation is only 4%, the price becomes $2.28. Inflation slowing down doesn't reverse price increases. It only reduces the speed. This is why living costs never go back to normal. Inflation is like climbing stairs. You never go back down.
The final question, will prices ever stop rising? Short answer, no. Long answer, as long as governments borrow, as long as central banks manipulate interest rates, as long as banks create money through loans, as long as populations expect rising prices, as long as crises force more money printing, inflation will continue. It may slow down, it may accelerate, but it will never disappear. Because inflation is not a glitch in the system, it is the system.
Now that you understand how inflation actually works, you can see the truth most people never realize. Prices don't rise because the world gets more expensive. Prices rise because your money gets weaker. And unless you learn how this system operates, you will always be one step behind. If you want a complete breakdown of how governments manipulate interest rates or how the banking system actually manufactures money from nothing, comment next, and I'll make a full episode. This is Peak Economics, where the economy isn't just explained, it's exposed.